Pfizer and BioNTech are delaying their request for the FDA to authorize their COVID vaccine for children under the age of 5 until early April. Joining us right now is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He is the former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor who also serves on the boards of both Pfizer and Illumina. And Scott, what happened on Friday? I think this was a surprise for some people that this was not authorized.
Hey, look, there are no new safety questions with the vaccine. This is an issue of the FDA wanting to present to its advisory committee a very clear and static picture of what the overall effectiveness is of the vaccine. And you have a situation where the trial is essentially ongoing. This has been a rolling submission. The company is continuing to collect information. Pfizer, the company I'm on the board of. And, you know, you're going before an advisory committee on Tuesday when new cases are continuing to accrue in both the arm of the vaccinated patients and the arm of patients who didn't receive the vaccine. So it's hard for the FDA to present to the advisory committee a sort of settled data set when the data set continues to evolve because we're still in the setting of this Omicron wave. And since there's a low number of cases overall in the clinical trial, most kids are not getting symptomatic COVID. One case in one direction or another can tip the perception of the vaccine's overall effectiveness. And so the FDA wanted to take the time for this data set to effectively settle down, to get to a point, and that point's probably going to be after they've administered the third dose and have the data from that third dose, that they're going to have a complete data set that isn't continuing to evolve, that the Omicron wave will have passed, that children will have received that dose and gotten maximal efficacy. And at that point, you'll be able to get more of a fixed perception of the vaccine's overall effectiveness.
The perception, I will tell you, among people who I spoke with over the weekend was that, OK, this means that maybe kids under age 5 don't need it. Maybe they're not as not in the position to get really sick from this anyway. Is that the right thinking to have coming out of this?
Well, look, the reality is that young kids are at less risk overall from COVID. The youngest kids, though, very young kids do have a risk from the disease. And there's a lot of children who have other health conditions that put them at heightened risk from COVID. If you look overall at the about 1,100 pediatric deaths that have occurred from COVID since the start of the pandemic, about 400 have been in children under the age of 5. So of the 11.4 million diagnosed pediatric cases of COVID, only 1.6 million have been in children under the age of 5, so about 15%. Yet about 35 to 40% of the pediatric deaths that we've seen, that we've documented, have been in children under the age of 5. So young kids are being impacted by this. It's overall a very low rate. The first thing people say to me when I cite that data is, well, tell us about flu, on the perception that there's a lot of pediatric flu deaths as well. But in fact, if you look over the last 2 years, only 5 children have died from flu. And that's because we've been doing a very good job sheltering children from respiratory pathogens. But still, 1,100 children have succumbed to COVID. So while COVID overall is a lot less of a risk in young kids, there are young kids who are getting into trouble with it, and there are young kids that are at higher risk. Final point I'll say is that I would have expected, and I still expect, that if this vaccine is authorized, or the Moderna vaccine for that matter, I believe that the CDC will issue what we call a permissive recommendation. They're not going to say children under the age of 5 should get vaccinated. They'll say something like they could get vaccinated to reduce their risk. And so I would expect that this isn't going to be mandated, that uptake is going to be modest. I suspect there's only going to be 15 or 20% of parents who go out and get their young kids vaccinated. But it's going to be a percentage of parents who are worried about COVID, either because they know that their kids are at risk because maybe they go to work and could potentially bring it into the home, or their kids have other health conditions that put them at risk. So for the parents who were going to vaccinate their kids, this was very important, and it still remains important.